First up is the new Apple TV Plus film, The Gorge. It stars Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy, and they star as two highly trained operatives on the opposite sides of this mysterious gorge, and then they have to fight against this unseen enemy. Now, I didn't even know the part about the unseen enemy going into this film. I just went, okay, there's this new film. I haven't heard a lot about it. It does star two people. I know who they are. Let's see what happens here. I should also note it has Sigourney Weaver in it, which I will watch almost anything with Sigourney Weaver in it. So I was not expecting anything from this film. Now, if I had kept reading the description past just Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller are in it, I would have seen the thing about the unseen enemy. That is mostly what this film is about. It is much more about the tactical action-adventure stuff than the two opposing operatives who are flirting with each other over a gorge. That's not a spoiler. That's in the trailers. So the second half of the film, and I will say, it took a really long time for them to get to that part of the film. So if you were like me and you didn't know that there was a whole secondary plot and major conceit to this film, you'd be like, are they just gonna flirt using like Love Actually style cue cards at each other for the entire length of the film? No, the answer is no. This is actually an action film. It just takes a really long time to get to there. Now, once we get to that part, I was like, oh, this is not as bad, or I don't even know if I was expecting it to be bad because I didn't expect anything from it. But I was like, this is a very different film. This is not a terrible film. It's not a good film by any means, but it is an action thriller film. It felt like, and again, whenever I say this, I don't mean it as an insult. It felt like a video game. It is directly from the plot of several video games, actually. And I was like, oh, if you had led with this and spent less time on the, I don't need them to establish a relationship for as long as it takes them to establish a relationship to become invested in what eventually this film wants to be the driving nature and conceit and motivations of this. So I was like, we could have shaved off a fair amount of time, and I think this would have been a tighter film. Again, felt very video gamey, but also trying to be academic. You know, they're putting in all these quotes from very famous authors or poets and all this stuff, and I'm just like, stop trying to pretend that you are something that you are not. I think if this film had been willing to just embrace that it is an action thriller on a medium-sized budget, because a lot of this felt like it was filmed in front of a green screen or the volume. Like, I don't feel like there was a single, maybe there were two practical sets or spaces they were in for the entire time that the film took place. Like, I think if it just leaned in, actually, what I really want from this film was for it to be campy, but it wasn't that. So you either need to shave away the spending way too long on them building a dynamic from afar that doesn't work. Like, they're both very solid actors, and so I think they sell it within reason. Also, there's just an aggressive suspension of disbelief that goes into this film. You either shave that away and lean directly into the action mystery, you know, what's going on, what is this governmental clandestine thing that they're involved in, or you get rid of that part entirely, although I don't think you can get away with this given how heavily they indexed on that habit. So I was expecting absolutely nothing from this film. I did not know anything about it going into it, aside from the 2 stars, who I think do an okay job. I don't want to praise them too much. It's funny because in the lead up to watching this film, I was like, oh yeah, Anya Taylor-Joy is a really good actress. I should rewatch The Queen's Gambit. So my actual advice to you is to just rewatch The Queen's Gambit instead of this film. However, if you are desperate for content, because we are in that point of the year, this is an okay background watch. Like, it's not if you like a good, especially military-themed thing, this might be more enjoyable for you. I don't want to give too much away, but I think Jack Reacher, but also willing to be a little more mysterious or bend the rules of the world we live in, or push things to the extremes, and maybe weave in some things that we are not necessarily, that we do not actually have to deal with in the current universe that we live in. I'm trying to dance around the thing, but also if you watch the trailer, you're probably going to get a lot more of what I'm hinting at here. But if you're like me, you didn't watch the trailer and you just watched this film because it was on Apple TV+. So overall, should you watch it? It's debatable. It's honestly debatable. I think it's an okay background watch, but it's nothing to write home about. It is forgettable. You know, again, I didn't even know it was coming out, which is why I waited a week to review it. It is not the worst thing I've seen, but that's not exactly high praise. I'm going to give this a 2.8 out of 5. The next film I have this week is also one that I did not know was coming out because I feel like they really just buried it. And they buried it on Peacock. And I like Peacock, actually, as a streaming service. The film is Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy. And I recall seeing the last Bridget Jones film in theaters. I don't remember, I think, anything about it, except for a cameo from Ed Sheeran. But that does not a movie make. So I think the biggest thing for me in watching this film. And I really liked the first book. I really enjoyed the first film, even though I think it is a very bizarre casting choice to have Renee Zellweger, a hardcore American, play this very British character. And then the whole thing about her gaining weight, and then they've just given up on that. They're like, no, you can be skinny. I'm like, all right, sure. That made her relatable. And not even that she was a big person, but that she was like normal sized. And then they took that away from us. So in this, I don't remember anything about the last few films. You know, I love the scene where Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy says, you know, I like you just the way you are, all that stuff. It's just like, it's heartwarming, right? And then as the books and the stories, and I dropped off at a certain point, but as they progress, they get wilder and less grounded. And then I think this one has overcorrected in many senses, where she is facing, the character Bridget Jones, once again played by Renee Zellweger, is facing things in this that are really deep and depressing, and I don't know if I need in a Bridget Jones film. Like, the thing I liked about Bridget Jones is she was dealing with real things, you know, in the beginning. She was dealing with, you know, her frustrations with her family, her career, not feeling as far advanced as she would. You know, obviously the relationship aspect of it is huge, but it was always kind of, at the end of the day, positive and bubbly. And like, when things went wrong, at least it wasn't catastrophically sad and depressing and all this stuff. Now they've gone like over-indexing in the other way, and they've had to explain, why is Bridget Jones still potentially dating people at her age? And I'm gonna let you guess why Bridget Jones is dating people at her age, even though she has been given multiple, like, happy, pleasant endings. And I think I'm like, please stop knocking this character down, even though that is probably more realistic to what happens in the real world. I always felt Bridget Jones was a sense of escapism and a sense of, you know, inspiration in some senses, where, again, when she started out, I was like, oh, this bumbling, you know, clumsy but charming, you know, every woman can find true love and happiness. And then it just has gotten out of control from here. And now, again, it is overly corrected and grounded itself in a really kind of bleak way, but then is also still trying to go back to the fundamentals of weaving in this like, ooh, romantic storyline. So it's all over the place, right? The strangest thing, I think, for me was that Hugh Grant has returned as the Daniel Cleaver, like, Cad character. And so they're still trying to make him saucy, but also soften him in this. I'm like, Hugh Grant, I love that you're having this renaissance. You didn't need to do this. Like, we would have been fine without this. We've also got, you know, a bunch of people returning. You have Colin Firth briefly returning as Mr. Darcy. But then there's no way to talk about this without talking about the main plot point. Like, she is a widow in this, which is depressing. You know, it happens. I'm not saying that widows can't be the featured story characters or whatever, but the whole thing about her was this beautiful romantic love, and I'm like, oh, to see them undo her happy ending again, and for not even that good of a film, that's a bummer. So this time it's a, you know, again, she's in some sort of triangle-ish. There's a young gentleman that she meets, played by Leo Woodall, who's probably, let's be honest, too young for where she is in life and like the life stage he's in. And then there's Chiwetel Ejiofor playing the school teacher of her kids' students. And the other thing is, I'm like, oh, academically as an audience member, you know that, you know, the right choice is Chiwetel Ejiofor. One, because he's Chiwetel Ejiofor, and two, because just like where she is in life, if you followed her journey this long, all this other stuff. But they don't give you a reason, aside from you as an audience member knowing who he is, until like an hour and a half into this film to be like, oh yeah, he is the guy you should be gravitating towards, even though the film is trying to slowly set you up towards that. They just rely on your, you know, affection for him. And I'm like, I mean, on the one hand, okay, fair, it's him. But two, this is lazy. This is just lazy. You know, Renee Zellweger, not my favorite actress. It's strange to see her in this role at this point. Not bumbling as much anymore, but still kind of bumbling. The accent is still grating. Like, I respect that they did not recast the role at this point, but I'm also like, we could just stop making these films. Because this was somewhere between inconsequential at best or depressing and undoing, you know, the kind of like beacon of hope that she is at worst. And again, I don't want to undermine the idea of that, you know, women of a certain age at a certain point in life, like, cannot have their stories told. I just think it also is not being told in a very fun, charming, enjoyable way, and that they're relying on, like I said, your knowledge as an audience member of all the things that have led into this and who these people are being played by. And so that, I'm like, that's not fair. Like, you know, they bring in Emma Thompson for a reason I can only assume is a favor. And I'm just like, Emma Thompson, why? I mean, her scenes are great, but why are you here? This must be one of those, like, you have to do this in order to retain your British citizenship things that, like, I feel like all British actors have to do every once in a while. Like, you have to appear in something like a Paddington, which Hugh Grant has done. It's all this strange stuff. Anyway, should you see this film? I think if you have been with this franchise from the beginning and you have been invested in all the other stages of it, sure, go ahead and watch it. For me, and this also just has to do with the age I was when I read the first book versus like how quickly and mature the character has become on screen and in the books versus like, the actual time that has passed since. Like, I felt like there was a significant relatability gap between where this character is at versus the first character we met in Bridget Jones' Diary, either in the books or on screen. Now, some of that is just like, I don't have some of the life experience that this character now has gone through. And so for me, that made it slightly less relatable. I do think that might actually make it more relatable to a wider subset of audiences, but I don't know. Those are the folks who would have tuned in to the first one. So it's just this strange thing. And I'm like, is this character even culturally relevant anymore? No. So do we need to go back to the well? Could we not have just made a fresh rom-com or something like that? Or, romantic drama, whatever you want to call this. I would have preferred that than just undoing this poor woman's life. And again, like I said, I acknowledge these are things that happen. She is dealing with things that happen to people. I just don't want that for this character. And if you're going to do it, you better do it really well. And they did not. So overall, Bridget Jones, mad about the boy. I'm also going to give this a 2.8 out of 5. The last film I have this week is called Nickel Boys. And this came out a bit ago. I've just been playing catch up. And I have also been intentionally delaying my viewing of this because I knew that it would require an intense amount of emotional bandwidth from me that I had not had up until this point, but the time had come, so I finally saw Nickel Boys, and it is about these boys who are sent to this place called Nickel Academy in the deep heart of Jim Crow South. It's, I don't think this is a spoiler. There's an unfair arrest in one case, and it's just about this correctional facility designed for youth that is clearly segregated and treatment is terrible, and it's also the Jim Crow South. And so all these things alone, I was like, this is going to be hard to watch. Just state of the world, the subject matter in and of itself, whether or not we are in a, depressing state of the world, depending on who you are. So it's a good film. I want to be very clear with that to start. It is a hard film to watch, though, because it is a good film. There are also some things from a technical perspective that I think might require a sense of adjustment from a broader audience. This film does a thing, and I don't think this is a spoiler. It's told from the first-person point of view from the Nickel Boys, and so a lot of it, especially in the beginning, a lot of it is, not the perspective we're used to seeing when we go watch a film, and so it took a little while to adjust. I understand why they did it, and I think it is a bold move. I don't know if it paid off in every sense. There are certain sequences where you're like, oh man, okay, yes, this is a really valuable use of this perspective. There are others where I'm like, could we have cut to a third person point of view on this? Potentially, but I respect the filmmakers committing to this. I don't want to call it a bit, but committing to this artistic expression. Like I said, it takes place in a correctional academy, whatever you want to call it, in the Jim Crow South, featuring characters of color, two black characters. Like, this is going to be hard to watch, if you have any sort of sense of morality or soul, this will be heartbreaking. It's well told, it's well acted, but it is hard to digest. And I think, I want to be respectful of if you are dealing with a lot right now. This isn't one that I'm going to run out and be like, yes, you have to watch it. It is good. It is solid. I don't know if it is the best film, and I it's hard to compare, but I'm just like, oh, there are areas where I could have seen different choices, maybe strengthening things, and again, respect to Ramel Ross, who is the director. This is tough material to adapt. I also want to give a shout out to the actors, of course, Ethan Harris, Brandon Wilson, you've got Anjanae Ellis-Taylor, you've got Fred Hetchinger, who, for such a nice person, I've only met him a few times, but in person, a nice person, man, does he get cast in these, he's real good at playing bad. You've got Hamish Linklater and Daveed Diggs, and, again, I think everyone is committed to the vision. I think this might be one of those scenarios where maybe you become too close to the material in a way that, this is probably the exact expression of the film he wanted, but that doesn't make it the most accessible version of the film, and I do think, considering the story they are telling, it could have had potentially even more value if they were willing to potentially express themselves differently. But at the same time, I'm like, you got to respect the commitment to this. It did not feel like there were studio notes anywhere over this film, which is a hard thing to come by in this day and age. So, like I said, I really respect this film. I can't say I enjoyed it in the classical sense because it is just hard to watch because of the things that it is successful at. But overall, I'm going to give it a 4.2 out of 5. And I will say, just make sure that you have the emotional bandwidth to watch it when you do watch it. But I'm definitely saying it's worth a watch.